CL 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call.
That's correct. The show is Experts on Call. I'm Zach Spencer. Now, we're talking about Strata Living, and the show is called StrataLife. Key Pacific Property Management, along with a number of trusted Strata industry professionals, are developing a resource designed to connect Strata councils with high-quality, reputable Strata-related service providers. Now, this is very important because anybody that's been involved with a Strata, your building always needs maintenance and some kind of commitment in terms of, maintenance, insurance, maybe even a building manager. And we're going to talk about all of that in what we call StrataLife. Joining me in studio today is Drew Grout. He's the Director of Strata Services from Key Pacific Property Management. Welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Key Pacific Property Management has been serving Metro Vancouver since 1998. Gordon Lai, welcome back to the show. He's the Client Executive and Vice President of CMW Insurance. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And Randy Gordon is a newbie, first time on the show. He's a little nervous. Don't worry, we're going to be good. We don't bite. He's a technician at Ashton Service Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, good to have you, all of our experts here. So we have Key Pacific Property Management here. We're going to talk about stratas and what goes on with buildings generally. Obviously, Gordon's here to talk about the insurance angle, and Randy, you're going to talk a little bit of the technical aspects, especially around maintenance of the building, boilers, and that sort of thing, which is obviously
Absolutely.
very, very important. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the individual businesses. Now, Drew, what does Key Pacific typically do? You're the management company for buildings, is that right?
We provide a pretty broad range of real estate property management services. Our main focus is on strata management, and we work with together with the councils of many stratas to help them manage their strata and common property.
Are there any stratas that go it alone?
Oh, there are many stratas out there that go it alone. A lot of them are small, some of them are big.
Yeah.
And that's great. We're actually recently talking to a couple of stratas who have been going on their own, and they're just finding it difficult to resolve some of the issues that are prevalent these days versus 10 years ago when things were a little tamer.
That's what I was thinking, is that, you've tried it on your own, and then you bring in the professionals to help referee, I'm guessing, sometimes.
Yeah, correct. That in the financial side of it too. It's just becoming more and more important.
All right, so CMW Insurance. Gordon, tell us what you do for StrataLife. Like, how does an insurance brokerage work with buildings?
Well, basically, we're one of the top providers of Strata Insurance for Strata Corporation. That goes from insuring the physical property to the liability, giving coverage to directors and officers, and then of course when there is a problem, we then assist them in dealing with the claims, repairing the property, or in a case where there's lawsuits that's directed at the Strata Corporation or directors' officers, we also assist them in getting through those and through by their insurance policy.
Well, one of the things we talked about on a previous show was that a lot of people, if they're on the council or if they're a director, there's a certain level of obligation they need to know about when it comes to insurance, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get into that a little bit later. Now, Randy, Ashton Service Group. What do you guys do? You do all kinds of maintenance on buildings?
Yeah, we do maintenance and we install the systems from the get-go.
So what kind of systems do you put in? Mostly heating, that sort of thing?
Heating and plumbing. We do the new construction part of it as well as the service and maintenance of what's out there already.
Okay, good to know. All right, so Drew, we're going to jump into the mailbag right away.
Okay.
And we talked a little bit about your service and sort of refereeing sometimes these stratas, and I think there's a bit of a trend here with some of these questions that people have sent in. So it's going to get good to get your take, because not only people who are so invested in their particular building, and the great thing about Key Pacific is you look at many different buildings, so you have a bit of a history of what's worked in other stratas, right?
Correct.
And how you can problem solve here. So the first question is, I own and rent a unit in a strata. The strata has a bylaw that landlords must notify strata 3 days after a move-out that the fobs, those are the key fobs that let you in and out of the building, have been recovered or else been disabled. Both mine and my tenant fob were disabled, and I was fined for an illegal move. Is this legal or not? Do I have recourse? What typically happens when someone moves out?
Well, there are bylaws in place in most stratas, not all stratas, that govern that activity, moving in and out. and they require certain conduct in preparation for the move. It seems to me with this one, there probably are some bylaws in place requiring some control of the fobs, and for security reasons. And if the parties involved aren't following the bylaws, they could be subject to penalties. And it looks like in this case, barring receiving the fobs back from the move, they disable the fobs so they can't be used.
So who typically is the master of that sort of stuff? Like who decides, who has access to disabling fobs typically? It's the council, I'm guessing.
Yes, it's typically council. It could be a caretaker who manages that activity at their direction.
And do you ever get involved with those things?
From time to time, but we try to avoid that because we're not on the scene. We're not right there when it's happening. And it's difficult to have everybody in our office knowing what needs to be done and
move in and move out dates.
Yes, spur of the moment. So typically it's handled through the council.
So what would your advice back to them? It's like, like just talk to each other and figure it out?
Well, the question also involves penalties, I would assume. I think what people need to do is read the bylaw. Become familiar with the steps required under the bylaw. You follow the steps, you're not going to run into problems. If you don't follow the steps, then stratas are going to be on you to follow through and what's needed to be done to uphold the bylaws for the benefit of all the owners. So often you'll have somebody who assumes what the requirements are, and they don't really read. In this case, if the person knew they're supposed to let the council know that, hey, I've got my fobs back, then maybe they wouldn't
lock them out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, the other one I could see about moving time at the beginning or the end of the month, depending on how you look at it, is locking off elevators and getting access to that elevator for the move, right? And I'm sure a lot of times that's come up where they haven't gone through the proper steps to make sure that they have access to an elevator, or they're holding, or someone's holding it, and you can't hold everybody up.
Yeah, definitely. And more often than not, there are bylaws dealing with the procedures of planning your move, and that usually requires some advance notice for reasons you mentioned, making arrangements to get them the key, putting up the elevator pads.
Protecting the elevator, right?
That's right, and any other controls relative to building protection. And if you don't provide that proper notice, then people are scrambling, or people aren't available. Again, these are things that are usually handled by people on site.
But it's summer; people might be away on vacation. The person that's in charge of that might be gone, and if you don't tell them,
exactly. And also, it's your moves affects other people. We're not talking about a townhouse. We're talking about condos with elevators where the problems arise. And, people need to know that, hey, there's a move-in happening on Saturday morning. Instead of planning on doing something Saturday morning and finding that the elevator is not in service because somebody's blocked it off.
Right.
So communication is important, and proper notification just makes that go smoother.
All right. The next one, it says our last SGM. What does SGM mean?
Special general meeting.
Okay, special general meeting.
As opposed to an annual general meeting.
Yeah. Was in April and voted on resolutions regarding some major renovations and upgrades. After the meeting, I was told by the council president that the votes were informal, so the votes didn't count. The minutes have never been distributed. Is that right? Can they have a vote and not consider it valid? That sounds to me like that's kind of like an in-camera meeting, right? Like, or they've kept it off the record.
Yeah, a special general meeting is not normally an in-camera meeting, and they usually have pre-arranged and established resolutions to be considered at the meetings.
So you would have a special general meeting to discuss a specific topic, right?
Yes,
so
or several specific topics,
right.
And often something that may need to be voted on by the owners. So it could be to agree to deal with repaving of the whole property, or replacing the elevators, or something substantial. That
New roof or something.
Yeah,
right?
And it could require money. So there's requirements to provide proper notice and wording of the resolution to be considered and that sort of thing. And those are kind of official things. And when they're voted on, typically that the decisions need to be reported to people.
So someone usually records the vote, right?
Records the minutes of the meeting and the vote. Now, it's possible that there could have been, in this case, resolutions to be considered, But when they got to the meeting, the owners decided that it was too soon to be considering that, and the people in attendance voted to put it off in favor of discussion on the topic before moving forward. In cases like that, then you can get some straw poll votes happening, which are informal, but can give the council some direction as to how they maybe should look at proceeding.
So they could say to the owners, who here wants to push this back 90 days, and we'll talk about it some more.
Well,
10
somebody
people
else
put up their hand, and then they say, okay,
well,
let's
they'd
do that.
probably have to vote a little more formally to do that, to get it, to get it off the agenda per se. But other things are very informal, majority vote, come back to us in 3 months with this type of proposal or whatever the case may be. So that's what can happen to voting. But there's also requirements to provide some sort of notification what's going on. And typically those are found in your bylaws. The Act doesn't say you have to prepare minutes and provide them by a certain amount of time for annual general meetings. There are sections of the Act that deal with changes in strata fees at an AGM that require notification within 2 weeks. The standard bylaws of the Act provide for council minutes to be provided in 2 weeks, but that's the standard bylaws. It may not be your bylaws in the strata if you've adopted your own. So you need to look at your bylaws to see how they deal with the requirement for minutes, both council and AGM, SGM.
Okay, now you've told me in the past that typically it's the province has written up sort of a standard kind of bylaws structure that many new buildings will adopt, right? So you kind of go with what the standard procedure is, and then you amend it as you go along to your own bylaws. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how far off that sort of baseline do most stratas vary? Is it a lot or is it a little bit?
Well, it's hard to tell you specifically. There's thousands of stratas out there, but my experience is that most stratas that adopt their own bylaws incorporate much or most of what we call the standard bylaws, which are your bylaws if you don't adopt your own bylaws. And so they take some of these things, they simply incorporate them into their own. And things like council meetings, minutes, repairs and maintenance requirements of owners versus strata are usually incorporated and just carried over.
So it's not much of a variation from what the baseline is, right?
No, and they may add to it.
All right.
The standard bylaws don't require AGM minutes to be necessarily published.
The next question is, I live in a small strata. By mutual agreement, the owners take turns performing things like shoveling snow and irrigating landscaping. One non-resident owner, so somebody that obviously rents out a unit in the building, refuses to do her share. She's offered to pay the strata for her share of the work, but we'd rather she hire someone herself. Can we fine her for not doing her share? This sounds to me like not your typical strata setup, right?
No, it sounds like it's probably a very small strata where everybody's kind of getting together to do things that
save money, right?
Exactly. And I appreciate that, and that's great. That helps build community and everything else. There's a lot of pluses of that, but there isn't a requirement. You can't make an owner or owners responsible for things that the strata corporation is responsible,
which is common property, right?
Exactly. So the landscaping, the very things that is suggested in this question, are things that would normally, in a larger scale strata, be covered under an expense line on the budget for landscaping or cleaning or whatever the case may be. And everybody would pay their fair share of that common expense.
Right.
So you can't make an owner who's not willing to volunteer pay for the fact that they're not volunteering. She's willing to pay her share. The others don't want to pay a share.
They want her to hire somebody to do what her turn.
Yeah. So really, they either decide to share the expense of having somebody else do it, or they continue like they are and they step to the plate and volunteer, but they can't make her volunteer.
Yeah, but she could also say, okay, well, I'll pay you X number of dollars per month, and that money just goes into the revenue of the strata. And if you guys want to continue to just share the load amongst yourselves, then the strata is getting a benefit.
Yeah. If she was going to contribute money, it would be to offset an expense of the strata corporation or to contribute toward that expense. There is no expense here. You can't make somebody pay for a volunteer service.
Right. Okay. Well, that sounds like it's going to be sticky.
It will be. It will be.
All right, the next question says, we have a bylaw that limits maximum size of dog in the building. I pointed out to our strata council that an owner has an oversized dog. The council has informed me that they refuse to enforce the bylaw because they're going to try and amend it at the next AGM. Do they have an obligation to enforce current bylaws? Now, one thing I would say in favor of the dog owner is when you get a puppy, you don't know exactly how big it's going to get.
Yeah.
You sure it didn't mean that the dog needed to lose some weight?
Yeah. Are you saying my dog's chubby? I give him too many cookies?
Yeah.
All right. So what do you do with an oversized dog? And
Okay.
and if they are going to try and address it at the next AGM?
Yeah. So usually they're talking about height restrictions when they say oversized.
Okay.
They're not talking about fat. They're talking about, the
How big the
vertical,
dog is.
not the horizontal.
Right.
Yeah, you could have a bylaw that says a dog might be, can't be any more than, let's say, 16 inches at the shoulders. And that sounds like this might be the case here. So the strata is responsible for upholding the bylaws and enforcing the bylaws. But, there's some latitude councils have in how they do that. First of all, they may not believe that the dog is oversized and choose not to pursue that. If the person's persistent, they may have to go out there and verify it before they choose not to pursue it. In this case, it seems like it's been an issue that's come up before, and they're looking at changing it to allow
That person to keep their dog. Yeah.
a larger size dog.
Yeah.
And I guess realistically, if why would I take an avenue to formally advise somebody that there is an alleged bylaw infraction with their size of their dog when in a month or two we're looking at convening a meeting that could make that an approved size dog.
Mm-hmm.
So as a council member, I might also want to say we're going to put that off. We're going to wait till we see what comes of this. If our proposed resolution to allow it fails, then we have an obligation to uphold the bylaw. So they're going to have to follow through on it.
So have you seen instances where somebody's got, they're supposed to have a dog that's 18 inches high, a medium-sized dog, and they've got a Doberman or they've got a Great Dane, and they're forced to get rid of their dog or sell their strata?
Well,
or sell their unit?
Most cases, people will do something with the dog.
Really?
Yeah, it's happened. It's happened.
And you said, what are the 4 Ps again of strata living?
It's pools, parking, people, and pets.
Pets, yeah. I was going to add poop, but I guess that's the dog. That's part of the pets.
Yeah.
That goes under pets. All right, we're just getting started. It's a great conversation. I'm sure if you're a strata person, you live in a strata, you've maybe come up with some of these things. Maybe it's your turn to water the grass, not with the weather we've had so far this summer. You're listening to StrataLife on CL650. You just heard Drew Grout from Key Pacific Property Management. Gordon Lai is with us as well from CMW Insurance, and Randy Gordon from Ashton Service Group. And we'll continue our conversation next on CL650.
This is Experts on Call on CL650.